Imagine a journey where every part of you, the light and the dark, the known and the unknown, comes together to form a whole authentic self. A life where your deepest fears and desires are not enemies to be feared, but powerful forces waiting to guide you. What if I told you that the path to true inner freedom is not through escaping or avoiding these parts, but by embracing them fully? In the world of Carl Jung, this journey isn't just a possibility. It's the very essence of becoming who you are meant to be. Through understanding the ego, the self, and the shadow, Jung offers us a roadmap to transformation, a process that goes beyond mere self-improvement and leads to the discovery of our most profound and powerful potential. This is the path of individuation, the art of becoming whole, not by adding something to yourself, but by reclaiming everything you've ever been. In this video, we'll explore how these concepts weave together, creating a dynamic blueprint for self-discovery, healing, and growth. Let's dive into the psychology of Carl Jung and uncover how the trinity of the ego, the self, and the shadow can unlock a life of deeper meaning and true personal freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." This statement captures the essence of his entire psychological theory. Unlike many psychologists who focused only on what was visible, behavior, thoughts, actions, Jung turned our attention inward into the hidden world of the unconscious. He believed that true understanding of human behavior could only happen when we explored the parts of ourselves we often ignore, our emotions, fears, dreams, and internal conflicts. In this video, we are about to take that inner journey and explore three of the most powerful and essential forces within Jungian psychology: the ego, the shadow, and the self. To understand human behavior, Jung believed we needed to explore the structure of the psyche, the totality of all conscious and unconscious processes. This structure includes several parts, but the most central ones for understanding personal growth and inner conflict are the ego, the shadow, and the self. These three form a psychological trinity that shapes every thought we think, every emotion we feel, and every decision we make, whether we're aware of it or not. Let's begin with the ego. In Jungian terms, the ego is not the same as arrogance or pride, like it's often used in everyday language. Instead, the ego is your conscious identity, the I you think you are. It's the part of you that says, "I am a student, I am a mother, I am ambitious, or I am shy." The ego forms from your experiences, beliefs, memories, and how you see yourself in relation to the world. It's important because it gives you a sense of stability. But according to Jung, the ego is just a small part of the whole self, like the tip of an iceberg floating above a much larger and deeper mass underwater. Beneath the surface of the ego lies the shadow, one of the most misunderstood and feared parts of the psyche. The shadow contains all the parts of ourselves we have rejected, denied, or hidden away. These may include anger, jealousy, selfishness, or even creative talents and desires that didn't fit our family or society's expectations. When we were young and told, "Don't be loud, boys don't cry," or "good girls don't get angry," we pushed those natural feelings into the unconscious. But they don't disappear, they form the shadow. And although the shadow is often viewed as dark, Jung believed that facing and integrating it was essential for becoming whole. If we ignore it, the shadow can take control in destructive ways, like when we project our flaws onto others, overreact to small things, or repeat harmful patterns in relationships. But beyond the ego and shadow is something even greater: the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is not just another version of the ego. It's the totality of who we are, including both conscious and unconscious elements. The self is our true center, the deeper intelligence of the psyche that guides us toward balance, healing, and wholeness. While the ego wants control, the self wants unity. It calls us to grow, to understand our inner world, and to become the most complete version of ourselves. So how do these three forces work together? Imagine the ego as the hero of a story. It thinks it's in charge, but on the journey it must confront the shadow, the dragon, the dark forest, the hidden truth. Only by facing this shadow can the ego transform and move closer to the self, the wise king, the source, the treasure at the end of the path. This inner journey, which Jung called individuation, is the process of becoming whole. It's not about becoming perfect, but about becoming real, accepting every part of yourself and living from your true center. Jung's work matters more than ever today because we live in a world that often values appearance over depth, speed over reflection, and perfection over authenticity. Many people feel lost, anxious, or disconnected, not because something is wrong with them, but because they've lost touch with their inner life. Jung offers a map back to that inner world. He reminds us that our problems are not just obstacles, they are invitations. Every conflict, every fear, every dream is a message from the deeper self, calling us to grow. As we move forward in this series, we will explore each of these powerful concepts in more detail. But for now, just know this: within you lives a dynamic and complex world. The ego gives you identity, the shadow gives you depth, and the self gives you purpose. Jung's psychology doesn't just explain human behavior, it invites you to transform it. The ego, in Carl Jung's theory, is not something to be ashamed of or eliminated. It's actually essential to our functioning in the world. The ego is the center of our conscious awareness. It is who we believe ourselves to be. It includes our thoughts, memories, feelings, and the identity we carry in our everyday life. If someone asks you, "Who are you?" the answer you give, your name, your occupation, your likes and dislikes, all come from the ego. It's the version of yourself you present to the world. Jung described the ego as a kind of filter or lens. It interprets reality and gives you a sense of continuity. From morning to night, it keeps your life narrative together, the reason you remember what happened yesterday and what you plan to do tomorrow. Without the ego, you would be lost in a sea of unconscious impulses. So in many ways, the ego is a stabilizing force. It keeps you grounded in time, space, and identity. However, Jung was very clear that the ego is not the whole story. It's only a small island floating in a much larger sea, the unconscious. When we mistake the ego for the entirety of who we are, problems arise. We become overly attached to a fixed identity. For example, someone who sees themselves only as successful might avoid any situation where failure is possible. Or someone who believes "I'm a good person" might ignore or deny feelings of anger or resentment. The ego likes to think it knows everything, but in reality, it's only aware of a fraction of what's going on inside us. Jung warned against what he called ego inflation, a state where the ego overestimates its importance. This happens when people become overly self-centered, rigid in their views, or convinced they have complete control over their lives. When the ego is inflated, it blocks the flow between the conscious and unconscious mind. People in this state often ignore warning signs, suppress uncomfortable emotions, or project their flaws onto others. It's as if they're wearing a mask so tightly that they forget it's not their real face. But the ego isn't evil, it's just limited. It does its best to manage life, but it can only operate based on what it already knows. That's why inner work is so important in Jungian psychology. Through dreams, therapy, reflection, and creative expression, we can begin to explore what lies beyond the ego, parts of ourselves that have been ignored, rejected, or forgotten. When the ego learns to listen rather than control, it becomes a valuable ally in our psychological growth. One of Jung's most powerful insights is that the ego must undergo a transformation. It cannot remain rigid if we want to grow. Life brings us challenges, heartbreak, failure, loss, that shake the ego and reveal its limits. These moments are painful, but they are also opportunities. Jung believed that suffering can be the doorway to deeper self-knowledge. When the ego is humbled, it can open to the wisdom of the unconscious and begin a dialogue with other parts of the psyche. Another important point is that the ego doesn't disappear during inner growth. It matures. It becomes more flexible, more aware of its limits, and more connected to the deeper self. In fact, a strong, healthy ego is necessary for the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. Without an ego, we would be overwhelmed by the unconscious. But with a grounded ego, we can explore the deeper layers of the psyche without getting lost. The ego also plays a key role in setting boundaries. It helps us know where we begin and where others end. This is important for building healthy relationships. When the ego is weak or confused, we may become overly influenced by others, lose our sense of direction, or struggle to make decisions. On the other hand, an overly rigid ego can isolate us, making us resistant to new ideas or emotional growth. In Jungian terms, the ego is not the enemy. It is the starting point. It is the hero that sets out on a journey, but for the hero to evolve, it must leave its comfort zone, face its fears, and confront its shadow. Only then can it discover the deeper self that lies within. So while the ego is only a part of who we are, it is an essential part. When nurtured and balanced, it becomes the bridge between our inner world and the outer world. Understanding the ego is the first step in understanding ourselves. It is the face we wear, the voice we speak with, and the hand that guides us through the day. But behind that face is a deeper mystery waiting to be discovered, and Jung invites us to begin that exploration. The shadow is perhaps the most mysterious and powerful part of Jung's psychology. It represents everything within us that we don't want to see, don't want to admit, and often don't even realize exists. Jung described the shadow as the dark side of the psyche, not because it is evil, but because it is hidden. It is made up of all the traits, emotions, and impulses that our ego has rejected or denied. These can include things we label as negative: anger, envy, laziness, arrogance, but also powerful creative energy, talents, desires, and instincts that we were taught to suppress. Where does the shadow come from? It begins to form early in life. As children, we naturally express a wide range of emotions and behaviors, but over time, we receive messages from parents, teachers, religion, and society about what is acceptable and what is not. Maybe you were told, "Don't be so sensitive, boys don't cry," or "Good girls don't get angry." These messages taught you to push parts of yourself into the unconscious. The parts that didn't fit your family or social environment became the shadow. But those parts didn't disappear. They simply went underground. Jung believed that ignoring the shadow is dangerous. When we deny these hidden aspects, they don't go away. They leak out in harmful ways. This can look like sudden outbursts, unexplained anxiety, harsh judgments of others, or repetitive self-sabotage. One of the most common signs of the shadow is projection. This happens when we see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. For example, someone who represses their own anger may constantly accuse others of being aggressive. Someone who hides their vulnerability might label others as too emotional. In this way, the shadow creates conflict not only within ourselves, but also in our relationships. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit that we're not always kind, patient, or perfect. It breaks the illusion of the ego, But Jung saw this confrontation as necessary for growth. The shadow is not just a container of darkness. It also holds our potential. Buried inside it is raw, powerful energy that, if reclaimed and integrated, can lead to creativity, authenticity, and transformation. Jung famously said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This means that if we don't confront our shadow, it controls us from behind the scenes. So, how do we meet the shadow? Jung suggested paying attention to our emotional reactions, especially the ones that are intense or irrational. What makes you jealous? What kind of people do you judge harshly? When do you feel ashamed or embarrassed? These reactions are clues. They point to parts of yourself that you've hidden away. Dreams are another path to the shadow. In dreams, the shadow often appears as a threatening figure, a monster, or someone you fear. But these dream figures are not enemies. They are messengers, bringing you face to face with what you need to reclaim. Shadow work is the process of bringing the unconscious into the light of awareness. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or justifying harmful behavior. Instead, it means recognizing and accepting these parts of yourself without judgment. For example, realizing that you have the capacity for anger can actually help you set better boundaries. Accepting your need for rest can prevent burnout. The goal is not to become perfect, but to become whole. It's important to remember that the shadow is different for everyone. What you repress depends on your upbringing, personality, and life experiences. For one person, the shadow might be fear of failure. For another, it might be the desire to be seen or the belief that they are lovable. This is why shadow work is deeply personal. It's not about following a formula. It's about listening to your inner world and being honest about what you find there. In the end, Jung saw the shadow not as something to fear, but as a guide. It is the gateway to the self, the deeper part of you that longs to be whole. By facing your shadow, you free yourself from unconscious patterns and begin to live more consciously, more creatively, and more fully. The shadow may start as a stranger, but with time and courage, it becomes an ally, a source of power and truth that reconnects you to your most authentic self. In Jungian psychology, the self is the deepest and most complete part of who we are. While the ego is the center of our conscious mind, the I we usually identify with, the self is the center of the entire psyche, both conscious and unconscious. It is the source of our inner wisdom, purpose, and potential. Jung believed that the self is not something we create, but something we gradually uncover as we become more aware of our inner life. It is the wholeness that waits quietly behind the noise of our thoughts, the chaos of emotions, and the masks we wear. Imagine a circle, the whole psyche, and within it, a smaller circle representing the ego. The self is the entire circle, including all the parts we know and all the parts we don't. It contains our light and our darkness, our known strengths and hidden weaknesses, our dreams, instincts, fears, desires, and everything we've yet to discover about ourselves. It is not limited by the roles we play, the identities we cling to, or the opinions we hold. The self is beyond all of that. It is our true nature, the blueprint of who we are meant to become. One of Jung's most important ideas is that the self is not the same as the ego's ideal version of itself. We often think of self-improvement as becoming better, more successful, more admired, more in control. But the self is not interested in perfection. It is interested in integration. It wants us to embrace all of who we are, including the messy, painful, or contradictory parts. It pushes us to grow, not by rejecting who we were, but by including more of ourselves in our awareness. The self communicates through symbols, dreams, synchronicities, and deep inner experiences. It often appears in dreams as a wise old man, a divine child, a mandala, or a powerful animal. These symbols are not random. They are the language of the unconscious, trying to guide the ego toward a deeper understanding of itself. When we ignore the self, we may feel lost, stuck, or fragmented. But when we start listening, we feel more centered, more alive, and more connected, not just to ourselves, but to something larger than ourselves. One of the most beautiful aspects of the self is that it is inherently healing. Jung believed that the self has a natural tendency to bring balance to the psyche. When we are out of harmony, too focused on logic and ignoring emotion, or too focused on others and forgetting ourselves, the self will send signals to wake us up. These can come as dreams, crises, or sudden insights. Although they may seem disruptive, their purpose is to restore inner balance and guide us back to the path of wholeness. Reaching the self is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong journey. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual unfolding of the self through greater self-awareness, shadow work, and integration of unconscious material. The journey begins when the ego realizes it is not the master of the psyche, but only a part of a much greater whole. This realization often comes through life experiences that challenge our self-image, failure, illness, conflict, or moments of profound change. These events strip away the surface layers of who we think we are and push us to discover who we truly are underneath. The self also teaches us humility. It reminds us that we are not always in control, and that true wisdom often comes from surrender, not force. At the same time, it empowers us by showing us that we are far more than we thought. We are not just our past mistakes, our current struggles, or our future plans. We are a living, evolving process, a mystery unfolding over time. Jung often described the self as both personal and universal. It is uniquely ours, yet also connects us to something greater, to nature, to humanity, and even to the divine. When we live from the ego alone, life can feel narrow and repetitive. But when we live from the self, life opens up. We feel more meaning, more creativity, more connection. We no longer see our problems as things to fix, but as messages from the deeper self inviting us to grow. Ultimately, the self is the source of our true identity, not a label or a role, but a living center that holds all we are and all we can become. To meet the self is to come home to ourselves. It is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new way of living, one that is more honest, more balanced, and more whole. In Jungian psychology, the relationship between the ego and the self is central to our inner development. The ego is the conscious identity, the part of us that makes decisions, plans, and defines who we are in daily life. The self, on the other hand, is the totality of our being, both conscious and unconscious, and holds the deeper meaning of our life. The journey of psychological growth involves a constant dance between these two. It is not about choosing one over the other, but learning how they can work together. At the beginning of life, our identity is mostly shaped by the ego. We learn who we are through our family, culture, and personal experiences. We create a personality that helps us survive and succeed. This is important and necessary. The ego gives us a sense of direction and structure. It helps us navigate the world. But over time, we may begin to feel that something is missing, that there is more to us than what we show or even know. That's when the deeper self begins to call. This call often comes through dreams, inner restlessness, or life challenges. You may start to question your goals, feel disconnected from your life, or struggle with emotions you can't explain. These are signs that the self is trying to make itself known. It's like a quiet whisper from within, inviting the ego to step back and listen. But this can be scary for the ego, which likes to be in control. The journey toward the self requires the ego to surrender its illusion of being the whole story. This is where inner conflict often arises. The ego wants to stay comfortable, but the self demands truth. The ego likes certainty. The self embraces mystery. The ego avoids pain. The self knows that healing often comes through it. To grow, the ego must become humble, not weak, but willing to learn. This shift is not about destroying the ego, but transforming it. A mature ego becomes flexible, self-aware, and able to cooperate with the self rather than fighting against it. Jung described this process as individuation, the path to becoming whole. It is not a straight road, but a spiral, moving through phases of insight, confusion, integration, and renewal. In this process, the ego gradually makes room for the unconscious. It listens to dreams, reflects on symbols, and begins to face the shadow. As the ego becomes more honest and open, it starts to serve the self instead of trying to control everything. One of the most powerful transformations occurs when the ego realizes that it is not the center of the universe. This can be a painful but liberating moment. It often comes during times of crisis, when plans fail, relationships end, or old identities no longer work. These moments break the ego's illusion of control and open a space for deeper truths to emerge. In Jung's view, these crises are not punishments. They are invitations to align more closely with the self. The balance between ego and self is delicate. Too much ego and we become rigid, anxious, and cut off from deeper meaning. Too much identification with the self without a grounded ego, and we risk losing touch with reality, becoming lost in fantasies or inflated spiritual ideas. True growth lies in the integration of both. The ego grounds us in the world. The self connects us to the soul. In everyday life, this dance shows up in subtle ways. When we make choices that align with our deeper values, listen to our intuition, and face our inner conflicts with honesty, we are living in relationship with the self. When we ignore our inner voice, cling to surface identities, or deny uncomfortable truths, we fall back into ego-driven living. Neither is entirely right or wrong. What matters is awareness and balance. Over time, this relationship becomes a dialogue. The ego learns to trust the guidance of the self, and the self expresses itself more clearly through the life of the ego. This leads to a life that feels more authentic, creative, and meaningful. We no longer see ourselves as divided or broken, but as evolving beings on a sacred journey. In the end, the dance between ego and self is not a battle, but a union. It is the path of becoming who we truly are, not by rejecting parts of ourselves, but by integrating them into a living, breathing whole. This is the heart of Jung's vision, not perfection, but wholeness. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not just a hidden part of the psyche. It is a crucial agent of transformation. While most people try to avoid or suppress their darker traits, Jung believed that facing the shadow is essential to becoming whole. He did not see the shadow as a problem to solve, but as a powerful force that, when integrated, leads to real psychological and spiritual growth. The very things we fear, deny, or reject in ourselves often hold the keys to our evolution. The shadow contains all the qualities that we have pushed out of our conscious identity. Our anger, jealousy, greed, selfishness, fear, insecurity, even hidden talents and passions. These parts didn't disappear. They live on in the unconscious and continue to influence us in ways we don't realize. The more we suppress them, the more they control us from the shadows. This is why Jung said, "What you resist persists." When left unconscious, the shadow shows up through projection, emotional reactivity, anxiety, and harmful patterns that repeat in our relationships and choices. True transformation begins when we stop running from these hidden parts and begin to face them. This process is often uncomfortable because it shatters our illusions about who we are. We may discover that we're not always kind, not always strong, or not as in control as we thought. But this moment of honest self-awareness is also the turning point. Jung called it the beginning of the night sea journey, a deep inner journey through darkness that ultimately leads to light. By facing the shadow, we reclaim parts of ourselves that we have lost. For example, someone who was taught to always be nice may have buried their assertiveness in the shadow. When they begin to work with the shadow, they rediscover their ability to say no, to stand up for themselves, to express anger in healthy ways. What once felt threatening becomes empowering. The energy trapped in the shadow is released, and it begins to serve rather than sabotage. Shadow work transforms inner conflict into creative energy. Artists, writers, and thinkers throughout history have tapped into their shadows to create powerful, meaningful work. Jung believed that the shadow holds immense creative potential because it contains raw, unfiltered emotion and untamed truths. When we integrate these elements into consciousness, we become more honest, more expressive, and more alive. Another major benefit of working with the shadow is that it deepens empathy. When we confront our own flaws and darkness, we become less judgmental of others. We recognize that everyone carries hidden struggles. This softens the ego's need to be superior and opens the heart to connection. It also breaks the cycle of projection, where we blame others for things we cannot accept in ourselves. As we reclaim our projections, we begin to take responsibility for our inner world, leading to healthier relationships and a clearer sense of self. But how do we actually integrate the shadow? The process begins with awareness. Pay attention to your emotional triggers, moments when you overreact or feel disproportionate anger, shame, or guilt. These strong feelings often point to repressed parts of the psyche. Journaling, dream work, therapy, and inner dialogue are powerful tools for exploring the shadow. You might ask yourself, what part of myself am I avoiding? What am I afraid others might see in me? Importantly, shadow work is not about acting out every dark impulse. It's about understanding, not indulging. We don't become free by giving in to the shadow. We become free by recognizing its influence and choosing consciously how to respond. It is a process of inner alchemy, where we turn psychological lead into spiritual gold. Jung taught that wholeness comes not from being pure, but from embracing our contradictions. We are both light and dark, kind and cruel, strong and vulnerable. The more we integrate these opposites, the more balanced we become. And in that balance, we find real freedom. The freedom to live authentically, love deeply, and act with integrity. In the end, the shadow's role in transformation is not to destroy us, but to awaken us. It is the gatekeeper to the deeper self. By walking through its darkness with courage and honesty, we uncover the full richness of who we are. The shadow may appear as a monster, but when we face it, it becomes a guide, one that leads us out of fear and into a life of depth, meaning, and wholeness. Individuation is the core of Carl Jung's psychological philosophy. It is the lifelong process of becoming the person you were meant to be, not by becoming perfect, but by becoming whole. Unlike the idea of self-improvement, which focuses on changing yourself to meet ideals, individuation is about discovering your true self by integrating all parts of your psyche: the ego, the shadow, the unconscious, the inner child, the animus or anima, and ultimately, the self. This journey is not about adding something to who you are. It's about uncovering what is already there, waiting to be seen. Jung described individuation as the unfolding of the self, the deeper, wiser part of you, through conscious awareness. In early life, we are mostly guided by the ego. We adopt roles, beliefs, and behaviors that help us function in the world. We might become the achiever, the caretaker, the rebel, or the good child. These roles are often shaped by family, culture, and survival needs. But at some point, many people feel a deeper longing, a quiet inner voice that says, "There is more to me than this." This is the call to individuation. The process of individuation often begins with a crisis, a breakup, a failure, a loss, or a deep sense of emptiness. These moments crack the surface of the ego and allow the unconscious to emerge. We may start to feel things we've never felt, dream things we don't understand, or face questions we've avoided. This is not a mistake. It is the beginning of real psychological growth. Jung called it the path of descent, where we confront the unknown within ourselves. At the heart of individuation is integration. We begin to recognize and reclaim the parts of ourselves we've disowned, our shadow qualities, our wounded child, our buried desires, and even our hidden strengths. This process takes honesty and courage. For example, someone who has always been the strong one may have to face their vulnerability. Someone who avoids conflict may have to admit their anger. These discoveries are not flaws to be fixed, but truths to be honored. As we integrate these parts, our inner life becomes more balanced. We stop fighting ourselves and begin to cooperate with all aspects of who we are. The ego becomes more flexible, less defensive, and more open to guidance from the unconscious. Dreams, synchronicities, creative impulses, and deep emotions become allies on this journey. The self begins to emerge more clearly, not as an abstract idea, but as a felt sense of inner wholeness and authenticity. Individuation also involves developing a personal relationship with meaning. We begin to live not by external rules or expectations, but by an inner compass. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibilities. It means bringing our whole self into our work, our relationships, and our choices. A person on the path of individuation may change careers, end toxic relationships, or discover a passion they had buried for years. These changes are not driven by ego desires, but by a deeper need to align with one's true nature. Importantly, individuation is not a solitary journey. Although it is deeply personal, it often leads to greater connection with others. As we accept our own complexity, we become more compassionate, less judgmental, and more present in our relationships. We no longer seek approval from others to feel whole. We relate to others from a place of inner stability. Jung believed that individuation was not only healing for the individual, but also for society. A person who is whole within themselves contributes to a healthier world. They are less likely to project their pain onto others, more capable of making conscious choices, and more aligned with their values. Individuation doesn't create perfect people. It creates grounded, self-aware individuals who can live with purpose and integrity. Finally, individuation is not a destination, but a way of being. It continues throughout life, evolving as we grow and change. There is no final version of the self, only deeper levels of understanding, healing, and creativity. Each phase of life brings new challenges and opportunities to know ourselves more fully. In essence, individuation is the journey of returning to yourself, not the self others told you to be, but the self that was always there beneath the surface. It is the art of becoming whole, of embracing your darkness and your light, your past and your potential. It is the journey Jung invites all of us to take, a sacred path toward authenticity, freedom, and inner peace. Living a Jungian life means more than understanding psychology. It means embodying a deeper way of relating to yourself, others, and the world. It is a shift in consciousness where you begin to see life not just as a series of external events, but as a symbolic inner journey of becoming. At the heart of this life is awareness, the willingness to look within, to listen to the unconscious, and to honor the inner world as much as the outer. A Jungian life starts with a new attitude toward problems. Instead of asking, how can I get rid of this? You ask, what is this trying to teach me? Challenges are not just obstacles. They are messengers from the deeper psyche. Anxiety, depression, conflict, or loss are seen as signals, not failures. They are often the beginning of transformation, urging the ego to grow and awaken. When you live with this awareness, nothing is meaningless. Everything has the potential to reveal more about who you are. Dreams become important in a Jungian life. Jung believed that dreams are direct expressions of the unconscious, messages from the self in symbolic form. They often reveal what the conscious mind refuses to see. By working with dreams, we access hidden truths, unresolved emotions, and creative insights. A simple dream can show us where we are stuck or what our soul longs for. It can even introduce us to unknown parts of ourselves. The shadow, the inner child, the wise old man or woman. Keeping a dream journal and reflecting on recurring themes can open powerful doors of understanding. Another key aspect is integrating opposites. In modern life, we are taught to split things into good or bad, right or wrong, strong or weak. But Jung showed that real growth comes when we learn to hold opposites, to accept that we can be both confident and insecure, joyful and sorrowful, rational and intuitive. This balance creates inner harmony. We stop fighting parts of ourselves and instead create space for all of them to belong. This inner wholeness brings peace and authenticity. Living a Jungian life also involves cultivating inner relationships. Just as we relate to people in the outside world, we must build relationships within, with our thoughts, emotions, instincts, and dreams. For example, when anger arises, instead of denying it or acting it out, you ask, what part of me is angry? What does it need? This practice of inner dialogue builds self-awareness and emotional intelligence. It helps you respond rather than react, and to live from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious habit. Creativity plays a sacred role in this life. Jung believed the psyche expresses itself through symbols, images, stories, and art. When we engage in creative practices, drawing, writing, dancing, building, or even daydreaming, we give the unconscious a voice. This is not about being an artist in the traditional sense, but about honoring the creative flow of life itself. By following your curiosity and expressing your truth, you become a co-creator in your own healing. Relationships also change when you live a Jungian life. You begin to see others not as characters in your personal drama, but as mirrors reflecting your inner world. Instead of blaming or idealizing, you ask, what is this person showing me about myself? This doesn't mean you tolerate harm or stay in unhealthy situations. It means you use relationships as tools for self-awareness and growth. As you become more conscious of your projections and patterns, your relationships become more real, compassionate, and soul-nourishing. Spirituality naturally emerges on this path. Jung did not promote a specific religion, but he deeply valued the spiritual dimension of life. He believed that the self often expresses itself through symbols found in myths, rituals, and sacred traditions. Living a Jungian life doesn't require belief in a higher power, but it does involve honoring something larger than the ego, a mystery, a depth, a sense of meaning that transcends everyday logic. Whether you call it soul, God, nature, or the self, you begin to live in relationship with this larger presence. Most importantly, a Jungian life is not about being perfect. It's about being real. It is a path of honesty, courage, and compassion. You learn to face your fears, accept your imperfections, and follow the inner truth that only you can hear. You may still make mistakes, feel pain, or go through difficult times, But now you experience these not as defeats, but as essential steps in your journey toward wholeness. To live a Jungian life is to walk a meaningful path, one that leads inward before it moves outward. It's not always easy, but it is always rewarding, because at the end of the day, it's not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you already are. And in that remembering, you discover the quiet power, the deep beauty, and the profound wisdom that has always been within you.